Hello, my name is Melanie King and I'm an artist based in Ramsgate in the UK. My presentation for multiple ecologies, diverse ontologies is Ancient Light, Re-materialising the Astronomical Image. I'm a PhD candidate at the Royal College of Art in the School of Arts and Humanities. You can find out about my work on my website melaniek.co.uk, and you can find me on Instagram as Melanie Cat King and on Twitter as Melanie K King. So my research question is as follows: how can the field of astronomical photography, viewed through the lens of new materialism, alter our collective perception of ecology? And how does the entanglement of astronomy and materiality alter our perception of photographic materiality? So within this time of ecological catastrophe, I believe it is important to readdress our tangible material connection with the universe and our planet. By analysing this interaction between astronomy, new materialism, and photography, I provide new insights on how this collision of theories alter our understanding of the natural world. I do this by demonstrating the interconnectedness between the universe, humans, and photographic materiality. I discuss the importance of interrogating the materials that we use on a daily basis, with a specific focus on waste produced by the photographic industry. Analogue astronomical photography, viewed through the lens of new materialism, uniquely allows us to understand the intimate connection between the cosmos and the earthbound. Silver is found within distant stars, yet it can be mined from the depths of our Earth and used to create photographic images. Calcium is also found within stars such as our sun, yet it is also a building block of bones and teeth, which can then be processed to make gelatin. This thesis draws upon my own reflective practice, where I've taken long exposure photographs of the stars within international dark sky locations and observatories. The methodology of this practice-based research is informed by Donna Haraway and Melody Dew, who advocate for an embodied experience of landscape, in opposition to a cold scientific view. The research builds on Donald Schoen's concept of reflexive knowledge and Katrine Held's hermeneutic approach. Within this research, I demonstrate a qualitative approach which enables me to gain an in-depth, multifaceted understanding of astronomy, photographic materiality, and ecology. This thesis is situated within the context of new materialist theories, which seek to understand the intrinsic material connections between human and non-human phenomena. I draw from theorists such as James Bennett, Karen Barad, Donna Haraway, and Robin Wall-Kimmerer, who analyse a complex network of material exchanges from a perspective informed by contemporary science as well as ancient indigenous perspectives. By understanding more about the interconnected nature of photographic and astronomical materiality, it is imperative to innovate new methods of sustainable photographic practice. This research therefore contains experiments within analogue photographic practice, which are less damaging to the environment, including plant-based developers and silver reclamation from photographic fixer. Distinct from contemporary astronomical photographic images, which are often made of composites and enhanced colour, Ancient Light demonstrates the intimate connection that humans share with the stars by examining the tangible, entangled connections between the stars, human existence, and the ecology of planet Earth. This thesis advances knowledge within the area by weaving these connections together, providing new insights into the materiality of photography through a lens of varying magnitude from microscopic to cosmic. So within this research, I'm going to share chapter 3, the materiality of ancient light. So the previous chapters that I'm talking about, they're talking about the experience of going into the landscape and taking long exposure photographs of the night sky within the environment and considering situated knowledge and embodied practice. In chapter 2, I talk about the experience of being in the darkroom and about the photographic implications of the ancient light process. And then on chapter 3, I talk about the materiality of ancient light from a new materialist perspective, and then I go on to continue talking about sustainable photographic practice and how that relates to new materialism. So I was very much inspired by a visit to the Alps in 2013. This trip was inspiring because it was showing me how it was possible to condense such a large amount of time into a material thing. I think that is the most important thing that I found when I was looking at these photographs of the strata, but also the strata themselves. And for me, the ancient light photograph as something which can demonstrate a really long amount of time. I was very much inspired by a visit to the Royal Astronomical Society, where I was able to see some astronomical glass plates. This is a great nebula in Orion, whose light has been traveling to us for thousands of years. And I find it amazing that the amount of time lapse since this light was traveling to us has encompassed so many thousands of years. And that's very much the basis of my research, kind of thinking about this indexical trace of light that has been traveling for such a long amount of time. So I'm trying to really think on a very scientific level about the interconnectedness between us and the cosmos. And so I think about a lot of different new materialist speakers who talk about this kind of interconnectedness on a kind of biological, quantum and cosmic level. So I find this quote by Timothy Martin incredibly exciting, talking about how we are interconnected with other tiny little beings that exist within the world as well. He says, the symbiotic real is a weird implosive whole in which entities are related in a non-total ragged way. In symbiosis, it's unclear which is the top symbiont, and the relationship between the beings is jagged, incomplete. Am I simply a vehicle for the numerous bacteria that inhabit my microbiome, or are they hosting me? Who is the host and who is the parasite? Human means me plus my non-human prosthesis and symbionts, such as my bacterial and my technological gadgets, an entity that cannot be determined in advance within a thin, rigid outline or rigidly demarcated from the symbiotic real. The human is what I call a hyperobject, a bundle of entities massively distributed in time and space that forms an entity in its own right. And this very much makes me think of what Carl Sagan says when he says that we're interconnected with the stars. And so this is a very famous quote where he says we are made of star stuff, but he explains that on a very scientific astronomical level. So our sun is a second or third generation star. All of the rocky and metallic material we stand on, the iron in our blood, the calcium in our teeth, the carbon in our genes were reproduced billions of years in the interior of a red giant star. And I find that incredibly exciting, that things that we find in our bodies can also be found in the stars. And it really goes back to how the universe was formed and how all of the matter on this earth comes from that Big Bang. I find that incredibly exciting. And I'm going to talk later about a project where I'm looking at silver and how silver is made in giant supernova explosions, but it's also something that we use in photography all the time. And because it's made in supernova, it ends up being very precious. So as with a lot of people, I've been incredibly inspired by Vibrant Matter by Jane Bennett. And what I really like is how she goes on to say about how interconnected we are with other beings and other life forms and other ecology systems within the earth, and how she goes on to apply that to how we need to act within ourselves. And I think I'm not going to read all of this quote out because you can see it on the screen, but the very important section for me is that bit which says, to harm one section of the web may very well be to harm oneself. So every time that we do an action which negatively impacts the environment, we're also negatively impacting ourselves. We are part of this web with other ecosystems, which can end up affecting ourselves. And that could be related to giant plastic ocean rafts that filter into our drinking water and then can become part of our bodies. And that's just one example of how we're totally interconnected with the very inspired by Karen Barad, who used to be a particle physicist, but is now a philosopher, and is very much looking at the kind of quantum level of materiality and thinking about how that can change our understanding of the world. And this idea of being entangled comes up again. And she says to be entangled is not simply to be intertwined with another, as in the joining of separate entities, but to lack an independent, self-contained existence. Existence is not an individual affair. And she also says that the universe is agential interactivity in its becoming. So it's continuing to change and it's dynamic. So very recently, I've started to work with sustainable photographic processes, and I've tried to connect those to the work that I'm doing. So this is a photograph taken in Penryn in Cornwall, and it's a photograph of the night sky, which I've then developed in Caffeinol. And Caffeinol is a coffee-based developer which uses vitamin C and soda crystals and is much less damaging to the environment. So that's one of the steps that I've taken forward into greening my practice and thinking about how to stop contributing to this devastating ecological crisis. This is also a photograph of the moon, which is by NASA, but it's printed using Caffeinol paper developer again. And you can see that the coffee has tinged the print. So for me, I like to think that the developer has some kind of agency itself. And I like that it's quite unpredictable and I'm not quite sure what's going to happen when I'm making the prints. I've also been working with Seaweed Developer on a project called Submerged Landscapes, where I'm documenting the area around where I live, which is likely to be submerged when the tides rise. And that's likely to happen within the next 10 to 20 years, so quite imminently. And this photograph was developed using Seaweed Developer, which is much more sustainable. And I also wanted to use the ocean materiality within the production of the work. Sodium thiosulfate is a photographic fixer, which is incredibly effective at fixing photographic prints, but it is also relatively unsustainable. So this is a photograph of the moon, which is fixed using seawater and a concentrated salt solution. So it stabilizes the print chemically, but because I'm using seawater, it's not incredibly archival. So in this case, the little microbes that were living in the sea had started eating the gelatin on the print. And also because the salt mixture wasn't completely saturated, the images started to fade. And I really liked, again, that kind of agential interaction between the sustainable photographic developers and fixers in relation to what I was saying before about interaction and interaction. Earlier, I talked about how silver is created in giant supernova stars, which means that it's very impossible for it to be created on Earth. So I've been using the silver from photographic fixer, which is usually washed away into the oceans, and I've captured it by using electrolysis. And this is my first experiment where I'd successfully silver plated a piece of copper using the silver from my photographic fixer. I've been very much inspired by learning about the history of the sustainability of photography, and this is a really great project called Trafficking the Earth, or El Tráfico de la Tierra, by Ignacio Acosta, Louise Perbrick and Javier Ribas, and they look into the environmental and political impacts of nitrate mining. So I highly recommend looking up their work. And Ignacio Acosta is also looking at the environmental and political implications of copper and silver mining. So I highly recommend that. One quote from that book is 20th century Chilean political history is revealed in that of 19th century nitrate mining. The thwarted attempt by Jose Manuel Balmaceda to restrict foreign control of natural resources in the 1880s foretell and echo that of Salvador Allende in the 1970s. There is no need to rely upon literary devices such as allegory following the USA instigated military coup. General Augusto Pinochet used the ruins of the nitrate industry as prisons for the workers and students of the Chilean left. Another book that I found completely interesting is Animal Capital, Rendering Life in Political Times. And in this section of the book, I'm particularly interested in gelatin production in the photographic industry as a byproduct of the meat industry. Nicole Shukin says the actual material consists of the leavings of tanneries and slaughterhouses, trimmings, so-called skips, ears, cheek pieces, pates, fleshings, etc. The suturing tissue of the animal bodies is exchanged for what Shepard calls the physiological and biochemical unity of image life in the duplicit material symbolic rendering of animals that help to leverage cinema into historical existence. In the material convolutions of photographic and film stocks, in the viscosity of their negative gelatin emulsion resides an opaque politics of rendering. So it's something that is very much connected to the history of photography, and it's incredibly problematic. And I'll talk a little bit about how some artists are hoping to combat this use of gelatin and try and find vegan options instead. Two other books that I found particularly interesting are Liquid Crystals, The Science and Art of Fluid Form by Esther Ledsley, and A Geology of Media by Jussi Pariikka. Both of these books talk about the unsustainability of digital photographic processes and also in media in general. So you might think that using digital photography absolves us from the issues surrounding the materiality of analog photography, but there are also incredibly horrible things that come along with digital media. Jussi Pariikka says we have shifted from being a society that until the mid-20th century was very based on a very restricted list of materials, to the fact that even a computer chip is composed of 60 different elements. Media history is conflated with earth history. The geological materials and metals and chemicals gets deterritorialized from their strata and reterritorialized in machines that define our technical media culture. So I think it's important to say that within digital photography and digital camera making, there are a lot of electronic chips that get made that end up emitting lots of toxic materials out into the landscape. And also there are lots of political issues with things like cobalt mining and other metals and minerals that are pulled from the ground. Now I'm going to show you some examples of different artists that have used different processes to try and combat this issue of sustainability in photography. So this is Catherine Arnett, who's made PVA vegan film, and this is for 16mm. So you can see here that it's quite imperfect, but it's actually worked quite well in terms of creating an image. And this is the very start of what she's doing in terms of making a vegan film. And this is a cyanotype made by Martha Gray on a bioplastic. So instead of using plastic or paper or any materials that might not biodegrade, Martha uses bioplastic as a substrate and has really successfully innovated this process during her master's in art and science. Similar to this, an artist called Hannah Fletcher has created a cyanotype and silver nitrate images on kombucha SCOBY, which is what you get when you brew kombucha, and it can grow to quite large sizes. So it means that she can make a substrate which is completely biodegradable and something that she can grow herself, which is incredible. And I just wanted to end by talking about hope. So what's the point of doing all of these small little acts that might seem insignificant, such as trying to reclaim silver from photographic fixer or trying to make my own developers from the plants in my garden? But I think it fits into a bigger picture where if we all do something which is helping to make the world more sustainable, we end up making a much bigger move towards sustainability in general. So I think that's the main point of what I'm trying to do in terms of greening my practice. But I also think it's important to act in general. And the last part of my chapter is looking at hope and how hope can mobilize us for the future and stop us getting stuck in despair. So I'm just going to end with a few quotes by some eminent writers who talk about hope. So Rebecca Solnit says, "It is important to say what hope is not the belief that everything was or is or will be fine. The evidence is all around us of tremendous suffering and tremendous destruction. The hope I'm interested in is about broad perspectives with specific possibilities, ones that are invite or demand that we act. It is also not a sunny everything is getting better narrative, though it may be a counter to the everything is getting worse narrative. Political awareness without activism means looking at the devastation you're faced towards the centre of things. Activism itself can generate hope because it already constitutes an alternative and turns away from the corruption at the centre to face the wild possibilities and the heroes at the edges or at the side." So Solnit's call for activism for me, in the face of darkness, chimes with Haraway's notion of staying with the trouble. In response to the gravity of the Anthropocene, Haraway warns against two possible reactions. The first is a dangerous amount of faith in the possibility that technology could save us from catastrophe. The second is nihilism. A position that the game is over, it's too late. There's no sense trying to make anything any better, or at least no sense having an active trust in each other working and playing for a resurgent world. A troubled term, but Robert Macfarlane says that it can be quite useful. So perhaps above all, the Anthropocene compels us to think forwards in deep time and to weigh what we will leave behind. As the landscapes we are making now sink into strata, becoming underlands, what is the history of things to come? What will be our future fossils? As we have amplified our ability to shape the world, so we become more responsible for the long afterlives of that shaping. The Anthropocene asks of the question, memorially being posited by the immunologist Jonas Salk, are we being good ancestors? And Robin Wall Kimmerer has an amazing book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which talks about how, which kind of talks about hope in terms of agriculture and how Indigenous practices can teach us how to heal our relationship with the land. And she talks about hope as well. So she says the stories are piling up all around in scraps of land being restored, trout streams reclaimed from soybeans, wolves howling in their old territories, school kids helping salamanders cross the road. If your heart isn't raised by the sight of weeping cranes, you must not have a pulse. It is true that these victories are small and fragile as origami cranes, but their power moves as inspiration. And Rebecca Solnit said all that transformations have in common is that they begin in the imagination, in hope. To hope is to gamble, it's a bet on the future, on your desires. And this is quite a famous quote, but I think it's very important in terms of thinking about hope in the face of devastation. So our task is to make trouble, to stir up potent response to devastating events, as well as settle troubled waters and rebuild quiet places in urgent times. Many of us are tempted to address trouble in terms of making an imagined future safe, of stopping something from happening that looms in the future, of clearing away from the present and the past in order to make future for coming generations. Staying with the trouble does not require such a relationship to time called the future. In fact, staying with the trouble, learning to be truly present, not as a vanishing point between awful or Edenic pasts and apocalyptic futures, but as mortal critters entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matters, and meanings. So I just wanted to end talking a little bit about hope, and I find all of those things incredibly inspiring. So that was just one of my chapters. I hope you found that interesting, and hopefully I'll be able to publish the research at the end of 2022. I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody's talk. Thank you for having me at the symposium, and I look forward to discussing in future. Remember, you can see all of my work on melaniek.co.uk, and you can see all of my research and work on the series so far. So goodbye, and I'll speak to you all soon.